Yes, ladies and gents, welcome back to the Faffing Over Frequency podcast, episode 3. And today I sort of want to talk about or dive into if it fits your macros and just the importance of nutrient quality as a whole. As an athlete, as a coach, I am someone that really pushes, the single ingredient whole food sort of layout of a meal plan. If someone's got bagels in their diet, I'm putting in white sourdough bread. If they've got squares bars, I'm putting in more rice. We're delaying the sort of use of simple sugars like honey and jam. If they've got any like protein pancakes in their diet, I will be taking them straight out. Because the sort of overarching theme with nutrition, inside physique development, in my opinion, is that not all calories are equal. Yes, you can argue macros are macros, and if you're getting something to fit your macros, yeah, you're half ticking the box. But I think if you're not striving for the high quality foods, you're leaving gains on the table. Like the same macros from a protein pancake versus chicken breast and potatoes, let's say, they're going to render two very different results for numerous reasons, which we will dive into. So, first of all, I would like to sort of touch on the importance of micronutrients. A healthy physique is going to be a more responsive physique. Micronutrient intake, reducing oxidative stress. These are two things that aren't just for enhanced bodybuilders. You hear that's where you most commonly hear about reducing oxidative stress and making sure you're nailing your health sups and having good quality whole foods in your diet, to sort of combat the negatives that come along with being an assisted bodybuilder. Obviously you're putting yourself more at risk, internally, organ health and stuff, so you're doing everything to uphold that. So people sort of think, I'm a natural bodybuilder, I'm going to live forever, I don't need to eat properly because if I weight train, I exercise more than the average person. These healthy eating sort of standards don't apply to me. Well, that's just not the case. To maximize your performance, to maximize your physique development, I think you need to be maximizing your nutrition. If we look at getting your B vitamins in, your fat soluble vitamins, your selenium, iron, iodine, it's going to create a better environment for physique progress. A less inflamed physique, you're going to have more energy, a better functioning thyroid. If you want to touch on metabolism there, being able to utilize more food, maybe stay leaner in your off seasons, even as far as improving muscle contractions when you're nailing your magnesium intake and hitting your recommended daily intake of these minerals and vitamins. You are literally just gonna be putting yourself in a better spot. I don't know anyone. If you phrased it like this, we're striving to build the most amount of muscle possible. And do you really think that a squares bar is going to deliver, like say a packet of squares bars a day for your food's high in the off season? Do you really think the 30 ingredient squares bar spread across a day of eating maybe one bar with 4 meals is going to render the same results in digestion and nutrient uptake as just extra rice, that single ingredient? No, I really don't think so. If we look at things like spike in blood glucose because of these refined sugars, these ultra processed foods, highly refined foods, whatever way you want to term it, I think you're missing a beat if you're relying on these. I don't even see the rationale of a Rice Krispie treat in a bodybuilding diet or a squash bar. Turned American on you guys there for a little bit, but I just don't see the application. Just eat more rice, eat more fruit. It's arguably easier to get in. And I don't know. I could rant on about food selection all day, but we'll get into the next point. And a big one, I think, is fiber intake. Now, obviously, fiber, soluble, insoluble, they're going to keep you regular, but having fiber content in your meals is going to reduce that blood sugar spike that you're getting when you eat a meal. So high carb meal, blood sugar is going to spike up. But if you have stuff like fats or fiber in the meal or protein sources, they're going to reduce that blood glucose spike. So ultimately, you're upholding a bit more insulin sensitivity when you're including these sort of blunters, I guess you could say, these things that are actively going to blunt that blood sugar spike, and ultimately pose gaining insulin resistance, if you want to say. Like too much processed food, whether it be bagels, which we've touched upon, whey, cream of rice, because yes, they're two quality foods for bodybuilding, but they are ultra processed. You have to realize, there's flavorings in both of those, whey and cream of rice. Or just not including enough fiber rich foods in your diet, like fruit and veg specifically. These are the two biggest sources of your fiber. A couple of carb sources like your oats and stuff, but you should be having upwards of 300 grams of fruit and veg a day. I'm having upwards of 200 grams of fruit in certain meals, and that's the only way to be designing a meal plan for me, unless someone's food is ridiculously high, they're really struggling with appetite. I have done in the past with clients, I pulled veggies out of their meal plan while ensuring they have a high intake of fruit, because that's obviously going to contribute to the daily carbohydrate intake. So it's going to help them get the calories in that they need while limiting food volume. But I think now, the further I get into my coaching process with clients, is if you need to pull out vegetables, it's honestly looking like the end of a push-up. I think it's time for an appetite reset or a diet phase. Even if you want to plug in an appetite reset, these things can be super effective. Even with a maximum of 2 weeks duration, you can completely reset someone's appetite. So that is one to think about. Now, if we're not getting enough fiber, or we're having too much fiber, but that's not really going to be the issue if we're having too much processed food, you're going to be affecting your bowel movements. You're going to be going days potentially without bowel movements. Now, what's this going to do? It's going to skew our visuals, particularly the midsection. You know yourself, when you're holding on to a log, you can't vacuum the same. Your midsection's not as tight when you're posing. You can just sort of feel that there is a sort of food volume or a weight in your stomach, and that's not what you want. Say you're in a dieting phase and your visuals are being skewed by not being able to shit. You need to fix something there. And then another thing that can skew is scale weight. Obviously, back to the sort of dieting situation, we're always looking for new lows, aren't we? I've talked a lot about body weight not being the end all be all of dieting phases, but everyone, it's in our nature to want to see that scale dropping every single morning in a diet phase. So imagine you haven't had a bowel movement, you haven't released stool. You want to go that far in days. That is a weight. Your food has to go somewhere. If it's not going out, it's staying in you, and that's going to be weight in your body, in your stomach, holding that. So you're not going to see a new low really if you're not moving bowels. And what could this do? If there's no significant change in condition, you might be changing or making changes to the plan that are unnecessary because you see body weight's not coming down, but you actually are getting leaner. It's just scale weight isn't coming down because the weight that you are losing is being counteracted by the stool just sitting in your system. So I think, like, just for mental clarity, you want to be keeping bowel movements as regular as possible in a dieting phase, and it happens so often. As food sort of volume decreases, you're naturally gonna be creating less stool, so bowel movements can slow down. So say you're actually having minimal fruit and veg. I see guys on prep when you're meant to be hungry and they're still maybe doing veg in one meal. They're maybe not even doing berries in their cream of rice meals. It's just ridiculous to me. This is the time where you really want to nail your digestion and make sure nothing can skew the visual or the progress of the dieting phase. And like, just sort of a question to put out there, a rhetorical question, I guess you could say, like, Do you wholeheartedly think someone with worse or irregular bowel movements, maybe having diarrhea some days, maybe not shitting for days on end, on the other end of the spectrum, do you really think they're digesting and utilizing their food as well as someone with consistent timings, bowel movements happening at the same time every day with super good stool? It's a weird enough topic, but you really have to question these things. If someone's got, I'm not even going to dive into that, but someone with better stool or better, more consistent bowel movements, I think you have to realize they are utilizing their food better and they are uptaking more nutrients from that. We dive into protein quality as well. I sort of touched upon that at the very start of the podcast. Do I think someone eating the same macros via a protein pancake is going to render the same results as someone eating a chicken breast and potato? No, I definitely don't think so. There's a reason we don't get all our protein intake from EAA supplements throughout the day, or BCAAs if you want to go that far. Protein quality matters. Certain proteins, differing amino acid profiles are going to have more or less muscle building potential. You want to maximize the amino acid profile in your food sources, really, or you're sort of getting the short end of the straw when it comes to muscle building. So if you're relying on the likes of protein pancakes, or maybe even, whey is an absolute quality source of protein, but if you're having particularly a whey concentrate, you can make a decent argument for a whey isolate being far better. If you're relying on whey 3-4 times a day, like a lower quality whey, like a concentrate, like I said, like maybe coming from a Perform or something, I run Perform Naughty Boy whey concentrates, and yes, they're fucking delicious, and I wouldn't advise anyone to move away from them, but you have to realize probably better protein sources out there. Then a little bit of a buzz topic, bullet point that I want to talk about as well is upholding insulin sensitivity and digestion. Particularly on the digestion topic, a diet full of these highly processed foods is going to lead to worse digestion simply through the amount of artificial sweeteners that you're intaking. And if you have worse digestion, I rant and rave about digestion. If you have worse digestion, I really don't think you're utilizing your food as well, and you're not building muscle the same. I think someone with spot on digestion, they eat and their stomach is clear 30 minutes later and they're ready for their next meal. I think they are in a far better position to be building muscle, whereas someone who's having tummy aches and bad bowel movements constantly throughout the day, I think they've got, to use the phrase again, they've got the short end of the straw, but on purpose, willingly, because that's what they've been eating. They've been eating the worst diet. Then more whole foods, to come back to the blood sugar spike sort of point. More whole foods, you're not going to be spiking your blood sugar as much. You're going to uphold your insulin sensitivity. You're going to remain more sensitive to food. You're going to partition nutrients far better, rather than eating the Squares bars, eating the honey, eating the bagels. If your diet is literally rice, meat, and fruit, I think your blood glucose is going to stay a whole lot better, and ultimately that's a longer runway for progression in the off season. If you can keep your blood glucose markers low, your HbA1c markers low, and I think the whole food diet really plays a role in upkeeping that. And you could also sort of touch upon maybe the people that are eating more processed foods aren't really touching on the fructose and glucose sort of pairing to aid uptake of carbs at meals. So there is literature to sort of suggest or back up that having a fructose source alongside your glucose source will help uptake the carbs. So if someone's not having fruit with their meals for the fructose, and they're just having a bolus of even rice, let's say their their meal is consisting of like 150 grams raw weight rice, and they're just having a serving of chicken with that, that rice would digest and be uptaked or utilized far better with a banana on the side, an apple on the side, just any source of fructose to help uptake those carbs. And when you're uptaking the carbs better, insulin sensitivity, more nutrients are going to be partitioned towards muscle growth. It's so important. I probably get a bit of stick for talking about insulin sensitivity so much, but I think it is so important. Yes, you're not at the risk of insulin resistance, unless you're an obese guy. If you're a natural athlete, it's different with the assisted guys, because some drugs like growth hormone or of a peptide, but you get where I'm going with it. They can promote insulin resistance. So if you're a natural athlete and you train, you're not really at risk of insulin resistance, but that doesn't mean you're not at risk of worse insulin sensitivity. So it's really worthwhile maximizing these small little habits that can help your insulin sensitivity and ultimately keep you in a productive spot for building muscle for the entirety of the off season. Now, if it fits your macros as a whole. Now, there within the bodybuilding or physique development space, there is a ton of ways to skin the cat. There's a million ways to skin the cat, or skin a cat, I think the phrase goes. But I'm really firm on this one that if it fits your macros is not the best approach. Say you let yourself slip for the day, let structure slip for a day, and you're on a sort of macro fitting approach. It means you've a lot of calories left in the evening. You're left behind with 2,500 calories in the evening. Does this sort of raise the question to you that if it's trackable, is it on plan? Could you stick a Nando's into your MyFitnessPal? Could you stick protein bars into your MyFitnessPal? Could you stick a tub of Ben and Jerry's on MyFitnessPal and say it's on plan because you can track it and it's fitting into your macros? And we all know we should all be treating things like this as an off plan. I hate hearing people say it's Nando's, it's on plan. No, it's not. You can't be accurate with that. So if you think just because it can go into your macros, it's on plan, I think you're deluded, to say the least. And you start just fitting in these things into your meal plan, like the protein pancakes specifically, or protein balls, like what is there, like 15s or Rocky Road protein balls, Nutrilene Scandal. I'm gonna take a sip of my water here, guys. Not sure if the Nutrilene culprit listens to the podcast, but he'll know I'm having a right dig at him if he does listen. You start fitting in these subpar foods compared to your whole source proteins, whole food protein sources, and you generally are just doing yourself an injustice or a disservice by doing these things in your meal plan. We wouldn't dare to write on your Google Sheets working with a coach, Oreo grenade protein bar meal one with 30 grams away. But if you're tracking macros just on MyFitnessPal, no one sees that. There's no accountability to stop you from doing that. Whereas if you're following a meal plan, it simply wouldn't be there. No one is looking at their meal plan and being, oh, protein pancakes and whey drip, or protein bar and squares bar for the carbs. No, we're designing whole food meals on a meal plan. Chicken, rice, fruit source, fat source, veg, maybe some probiotics on the side. You're making these colorful mixtures of meals where nutrient quality is important and it is being upheld. Now, there is a select few people who do macro track, but they're basically eating the same things every day. So they're basically following a meal plan. They're not exactly doing if it fits your macros, they're just macro tracking. And I say to these people, you're basically eating the same things every day. Why are you trying to market yourself that you do macros? You basically eat the same meals every day, the same grammage to fit your macros. Just write it out in a meal plan. The benefits of a meal plan, you've got so much structure for prepping meals. It's so efficient for working shifts. Not everyone's blessed as an online coach to be able to make all their meals fresh. So everyone's going to be having to meal prep 2-3 meals, to upwards of 4 for me, in a day. There is days, certain shifts that I prep 4 meals, all the way from my meal 1 to my post-workout meal, which is meal 4, and then the one meal I'm getting fresh is meal 5 when I get into the house again. But if I was tracking macros, we have the time consumption of deciding what meals are going to fit my macros for the day. Whereas with the meal plan, I have engraved in my mind every single weight of every food in my meal plan. Training day, rest day, meal 1 through 5 on both days. I know. So when I get into the house and I have to meal prep, I'm like a fucking machine. I can bang out 4 meals, and you guys see my meals on Instagram. They're not bland meals. There's upwards of 6 ingredients in my meals. We're looking like a chicken, rice, banana, date, honey, nut butter, cinnamon, salt mixture. Maybe it's my prawns with veg, rice, sauerkraut, macadamia nut oil, just all these different things. I'm getting the colors in there, I'm getting mixtures, but since I have a meal plan and I'm doing it so much, it's all stuck in there. Whereas if you're doing macros and you don't have a set day of eating, you have to actually allocate the time to decide what meals are fitting into your 210 grams of protein, your 400 grams of carbs, your 50 grams of fat. And then this sort of raises the other negative of decision fatigue. If you're on a diet and you're quite food focused, you may constantly be going back into your full day of eating on MyFitnessPal and adjusting things because you realized I could have 60 grams of whey paste here if I pull down my chicken in this meal, or I could actually have more oats in this meal if I pull down my dark chocolate in this meal, because the fats have opened up, so I can allow for more oats. And since I pulled down my dark chocolate, there's fats on the cards there. I can change all my meals. And when you are food focused, it might sound ridiculous to some of you guys with no food focus or deep into the off season, but decision fatigue is a real thing. It's why a lot of athletes actually just let their coach do their meal plan. I have a lot of guys, most of my guys actually, when they have a food bump, they've told me, you do you add it in and I'll have a look, and they're normally happy with it. I think that is honestly the best way. That is another benefit of having a coach. You can just go purely into athlete mode. You do not need to decide, oh, coach has given me plus 25 carb. Can I add a square bar in here? But it's not exactly 25 carb. What will I add? Oh, I'd love more fats, but coaches only gave me carbs. No, just let the coach do the work, and you just eat. Be the robot, be the athlete. Then if we look at a meal plan, we talked about the macros, a negative of the macros a couple of minutes ago, leaving calories a lot in the evening, a lot of calories left in the evening because you simply lack the structure throughout the day to get adequate calories in. But if you've a meal plan, you see meal 1 through 5 how you're getting your calories in. That's going to be a balanced intake across the day, not leaving thousands of calories for a big meal at night, which could possibly affect your sleep, affect your scale weight the next morning. If you're having a super big final meal, you're going to have probably worse digestion going to bed. If it's super close to bed, you're going to have a worse sleep. It's not going to be fully digested by the time you wake up in the morning. You're going to have a higher scale weight reading. Your midsection is not going to be as tight. Maybe you're posing, you're taking your check-in shots that morning. Your midsection's a bit blown out, and your coach is like, are we getting softer in this push-up? Potentially skewing their perception of your physique, all because of your lack of structure going into that final meal and having to make up for it. Another thing I really like to do with my guys, my clients, my athletes, is keeping their fruit and veg intake consistent. So I will have in their meal plan 100 grams of veg with this meal, 100 grams of veg with this meal, 100 grams of veg with this meal. So I know they're having a consistent 300 grams of veg. I typically add 100 grams of veg to all savory meals for my guys. Don't standardize fruit because, again, it is more carbohydrate heavy. So that just depends on the meals and the macro intake. But we don't track veg. I don't track veg as a coach. I just add 100 grams of veg to the side of a meal. You know, the calorie disparity between vegetables is so minimal, you don't really need to track the exact food source. So if I know a client is having 300 grams of veg a day, you can get a rough sort of intake or rough idea of their fiber intake. And that gives you a sort of idea on what they're intaking and how that sort of relates to bowel movements. If I've got my guys on this level of fiber, but their bowel movements, they're like shitting themselves all the time. I know and something needs to change, and I have that value of fiber to go off of. Whereas if someone's working off MyFitnessPal every day, maybe they're having 100 grams of veg one day because they only had one savory meal, or potentially they didn't have any vegetables with their other savory meals throughout the day. Maybe some days they're having 400 grams of veg because they've had four savory meals that day, and they haven't had any cream of rice or oats or anything. So fiber intake differs massively, even through like carbohydrate sources. Maybe the client wanted oats this day, so stuck on MyFitnessPal 100 grams of oats, which has however much fiber. But then the next day they wanted 100 grams of cream of rice, and that they are two wildly different fiber intakes. You know, one's rice based, one's oats. The fiber intake could be 10 grams difference there. That's going to render a completely different result when it comes to stool and bowel movements. So that's something I really like to keep consistent. Then once again, back to the working with the coach sort of aspect of the meal plan. It is a meal plan makes it so easy for the coach to keep in the loop with the athlete, monitor the diet, monitor the intake, see the food sources that the athlete's using. Are these going to render the best results? You know, is my client sticking in orange juice and Squares bars in their meal plan? I need to change that. Whereas if they're on MyFitnessPal, the coach can't see that unless they're asking the client to send over full days of eating screenshots from their MyFitnessPal. But even then, the coach only asks for 2 full days of eating a week. You know, them 2 days could be the client's clean days, but then the other 5 is when they put in the bagels, the jam, the Rocky Road protein bar, the Oreo grenade protein bar, just things like this. There's ways of going about it. And then if the coach has access to the meal plan, it makes stuff like food drops, food bumps so easy. As I said, if I have to give my client a food drop in a diet or a food bump in a gaining phase, I just go in, make the change, highlight it in green in the meal plan. I know what food sources they like because as a coach, I ask them how they're enjoying their meals, what's sitting the best. And you know, often if they're posting content as well, they'll post their favorite meals and stuff. So I know where to make changes. And then the likes of high days as well. If I don't see what a client's eating because they're on MyFitnessPal, how can I program a high day with what meals? You know, if, say I program in cream of rice for a high day for a client, but they've run out of cream of rice, they haven't been eating it for 2 weeks, but I don't know that. Yeah, they can swap it for rice, gram for gram, like for like, but it's just little things that little hurdles that you wouldn't run into if you had access to a client's meal plan. So I just believe a meal plan trumps macros or macro tracking if it fits your macros, whatever blanket term you want to use for it. I think it trumps it night and day. I think the only approach to physique development should be a meal plan. Yes, you should have the skill of if you're being out and about and maybe you have to run into the shop and buy a packet of chicken and rice cakes to fit your macros on a certain occasion because you've been traveling or something. Yeah, that's a skill you need to learn. But overall, I think you can learn that while being on a meal plan, just not being a dickhead. You know, you don't have to go for the meal plan or the Tesco meal deal if you're out and about. I think being on a meal plan is just always going to render the best results, to be honest, especially while working for a coach or working with a coach. But even still, working with a coach, maybe the guy is self coaching and he doesn't have that accountability of a coach. So he's just like, coming back to this topic, if it's trackable, it's on plan. You know, my final meal, I could have, let's see, oats, berries, dark chocolate, or I could have a tub of Halo Top and a square bar and a Pop Tart. You know, it's in my macros. So is that's going to render the same physique development, the progress? No, it's not. But guys, that is enough on that topic. It is a topic I am very passionate about. Nutrition is definitely one of the things I'm very into. I love creating meal plans of the intricacies of working out, fiber intake, food sources that work best for a client, working around digestive issues and getting the results. Because as I've said a million times, I think digestion and the food source, the food quality is such a underrated aspect of bodybuilding. You see these guys with huge followings and they post their meals, and it's generally so lacking of micronutrients, whether it's fruit or veg. They're not having anything. And these guys, people are signing up to your coaching and you don't even know how to program a micronutrient into their diet. But before I start calling people out, we will get on to the takeaway of the week segment. Now, every week I do have to clarify, this is not about an Indian takeaway. This is not a Peshwari naan and tikka masala order, but it's just something that I've learned this week, takeaway from the week, that I've learned that I will be using going forward. Now, it is 2 weeks since the last episode. Apologies for the delay or slight hiatus, but I'm lifestyle looping. I'm making YouTube videos and posting Instagram content, guys. Get off my back. Get off my back. So takeaway of the week, or takeaway of the fortnight. Fortnight. Fuck me. Someone shoot me. But this week it is tying in with the sort of change up of my split that I've seen, and the sort of change up of my training approach with like the likes of music that I'm listening to in the gym. What I've learned is you don't have to be so doom and gloom in the gym. Music choice can be that little more upbeat. I've been listening to a lot of 80s music and I've been enjoying my time in the gym. And you see my story, I'm still doing hard fucking sets. I'm taking a lot of sets a lot further than most people ever will in their lifetime. While I've got like Bob Dylan or Vamos a la Playa playing in my ears, I don't think you need to be listening to the Hans Zimmers, the seven, what do you call it, Avenged Sevenfold, the Metallicas. Yeah, the rock isn't that bad, but like the soundtrack music, the super sad music, Peaking It Real. Shout out to another good podcast they talked about. You don't need to be thinking about dead family members heading into top sets of a leg press. You absolutely don't. Training is the only thing that matters is the focus and being without distraction in the set. In the set is the only thing that matters. You don't need to be walking about the gym with your hood up, listening to, let's think of a really bad song, or not bad, but really serious song. Well, just Hans Zimmer's always great example, because I absolutely rinse Hans Zimmer in my training, or I have done. I loved it, but I've realized that you can be so much more positive in the gym just listening to a bit more upbeat music and still get the same results. Now, to sort of counteract this, or not counteract it, but add to it, yesterday, Saturday, Let's Grow Legs, I pulled 250 kilo off the floor for 2.5 reps. Promised a red dragon roll at Ginza last night for our sushi night. If I pulled a triple, bottled it, but besides the point. Since I've not been using these songs constantly for every set, for my pressing, I'm not sticking on Mountains by Hans Zimmer. I'm not shuffling the whole Interstellar soundtrack. So I haven't sort of tapped into that mental arousal that you can sort of get from these soundtracks. And the level that I was able to get up for that 250 kilo pull was ridiculous. And you can't constantly tap into that. Your nervous system isn't going to let you constantly tap into that if you're constantly draining yourself for these sets. If I was to have trained legs on Saturday, if I was on the day before upper on Friday, if I was to stick on Hans Zimmer and start shaking before my top set of the prime flat press, I wouldn't be able to get up for that deadlift set the same, because there is a sort of buffer period of being able to tap into this neural drive. But since I haven't done that in a while, since changing the split, I've still been able to take my sets of hack squat and stuff to failure, like absolute failure, just using a bit more of a milder song. But when it really came to it, and I knew I couldn't go into a 250 kilo pull listening to SOS by ABBA, I switched on the docking scene by Hans Zimmer in the Interstellar soundtrack. See, this is me using that as my example. But I also lean into that on certain occasions. I just don't have it playing all the time. I played that. Used to be my top set song for leg work all the time. I haven't listened to it in a long, long time. I was able to get goosebumps on my skin and just go to a different place. So when I really fucking needed it, I was able to tap into that neural drive through the music because I'm not rinsing it. I'm not sort of blunting the effect that music can bring to your training. And I won't argue, music can absolutely change your training. But for your upper days, your average hack squat days, you don't need to be listening to the most dramatic, intense soundtrack. You can go into a set with a more relaxed. If it's just a usual set where you're taking maybe a half a kilo progression, I don't think it requires that level of mental arousal. But if you're going for something like a milestone set, a 4 plate hack, a 250 kilo deadlift, a 6 plate uh, fuck, I don't know what other big lifts you could say. Maybe you bench press and you're going for a 3 plate bench press. When it's a big milestone lift and you really need to get up for it, up into that music then, but just enjoy your time in the gym more. We could be spending upwards of 10 hours in the gym a week. Enjoy that time, stick on some nice music, have a laugh with your mates if they're around. Just because you have a laugh in between sets doesn't mean that in the set your quality in the set is going to be diminished. I think what I've been getting out of my sets recently since changing up my approach has been night and day better because I'm able to flip that switch and get the work done in the set but still enjoy my time in the gym. And I think that's given me more productivity in my sessions just through enjoyment. And yeah, the 250 kilo pull, to pull that for 2.5. So that would have been last week I pulled 230 for 4. So I jumped 20 kilo, dropped 1.5 reps, basically 2 reps. But that's a big progression. That doesn't happen without being able to tap into that neural drive. And this is what I mean. If I done that every session for nearly every lift, I wouldn't get that same neural drive to that degree. So gonna leave that episode here. Hopefully you enjoyed the main topic and the takeaway. As just a general rule of thumb, what happens in the set and being absent of distractions in the set is what matters. Enjoy your time in between sets, enjoy your time in the gym. This is what we do. It's a game of longevity. You want to be loving that 10 hours a week that you're in the gym, not fighting demons with your hood up and shouting at the machine. Just in my opinion. But guys, if you did make it this far, thank you very much for listening. Episode 3 of the Faffing Over Frequency podcast is a wrap. So please like, share, comment, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, drop a rating on Spotify, maybe share it to your story. It is all much appreciated. So guys, I will talk to you in the next episode.